Geraldo Rivera has a report tonight on a man who has become a sort of legend investigator, dedicated to proving that some of these stories could really be true.
Well, many scientists and historians, Hugh, as you know, believe that most legends are a mixture of fantasy and reality. Well, the myth, the legend that the investigator is exploring is a rich story from the ancient past. It's the story of Jason and his Argonauts and their quest for the Golden Fleece. This report focuses on the present-day adventure to prove there really was a Jason, and he really could have found something called the Golden Fleece. Here's the voyage back into legend. Modern Greece is a spirited, exuberant, beautiful country. It's an ancient civilization still in love with its own heroic past. And that history is everywhere. In temples built for gods, filled with myth, and colored by legend. One of the most fascinating legends of ancient Greece may be partially true. It's a story filled with adventure, romance, double-cross, murder, and intrigue. It's the so-called Voyage of the Heroes, an epic journey supposedly made more than 32 centuries ago by Jason and his Argonauts. Well, Jason's quest for a fabulous treasure called the Golden Fleece is happening all over again.
Dick, keep the blade pushed right out so the square part is resting on
Tim
the
Severin is a British author, archaeologist, and adventurer who believes the story of Jason and his quest for the Golden Fleece, like most legend, is a mixture of fact and fancy. And to prove it could actually have happened, he's attempting to recreate that ancient voyage.
Almost invariably, there has to be something that starts the legend. Now, very often it's a question of discerning, as in this case, just how much is fact and how much is fiction.
32 centuries ago, each time the original Argo cast off, Jason could count on help from the Greek gods to keep the seas calm and the monsters at bay. Tim may not have that same direct line to Mount Olympus, but he does have the advantage of invaluable local knowledge.
Inside this bay, does the wind change during the day very much? You have to talk to the local people because they sail these waters all their lives. And what is interesting is that the local people will nearly always identify harbors which to them are very good and which are the old ancient historic harbors from the Bronze Age. The same harbor is still effective for them. Trim ship!
Depending on wind and tide, the Argo is rowed 3 to 4 miles an hour, 25 to 30 miles a day, through waters that can be dangerous even when calm. Soon after setting off on this day, for instance, our camera team spotted a shark cruising near the slick surface. We alerted the oarsman of the Argo, who went swimming anyway, heat apparently overcoming discretion. Not long after they were back in the boat, the shark returned, his fin occasionally breaking the surface, menacingly close to the boat. Finally, it was time for Trondur. The boat's artist is also its hunter. Wielding a harpoon whose design dates back 1,000 years, Trondur seemed almost a picture from the ancient past. A native of the tiny Faroe Islands near Iceland, he spent most of his life at sea.
Light pressure, low rating.
Waiting until Tim had maneuvered the Argo into position, Trondur cast the harpoon and hit the shark.
You got it. Ship your blades.
But the creature was too big and too deep. Dinner was lost when it managed to shake the hook loose and get away. Tim believes that it's stories like the shark episode, told, retold, and exaggerated over hundreds of generations and thousands of years, that ultimately become the stuff of legend, fact embellished by fancy. And of all the colorful aspects of the Jason story, none seems more far-fetched than the passage of the Argo through the so-called crashing rocks, illustrated by Hollywood in this B-movie.
Turn back, Jason. We're trapped.
But Tim thinks he's even figured out where they are located. The Argo reached the place after 5 weeks of hard rowing. Tim theorizes that the term crashing rocks is no more than a reference in very early navigation terms to this, a 13-mile passage against both the wind and the current. Here in Istanbul, Tim Severin and his Argonauts, their hands hardened now by weeks of tough rowing, faced one of their severest challenges, the Straits of the Bosphorus.
That narrow waterway which divides Asia on the far side from Europe on this one is like a giant funnel. The current comes from this direction. Tim Severin, like Jason and the Argonauts 32 centuries ago, was going against the stream.
You'll be rowing up there.
We're going to be rowing up it, and we are in the replica of Bronze Age ship. We are faced with exactly the same problems.
But the currents were so strong the attempted passage was postponed. So the Argonauts had 3 days off, and this exotic city provided distractions in dramatic contrast to what they had gone through to get here.
They've been sleeping on beaches, so tired indeed that a couple of instances, somebody sleeping on the beach another man has literally walked on him and hasn't even woken him up.
In one of the city's oriental nightclubs, the current crew of the Argo demonstrated a logical explanation for that part of the legend which tells how many of Jason's original crew abandoned the quest for the Golden Fleece after being lured ashore by sirens disguised as beautiful women. The next day, though, came the Argo's appointment with the Bosphorus. The crew, reinforced by 8 Turkish rowing instructors, passed the wreck of an oil tanker, a grim reminder of the treacherous currents. Then they had to dodge the one obstacle the original Jason never had to face, the ship traffic on what's become one of the world's busiest stretches of water. Once in the current, the choppy seas actually spun the Argo around. But after a couple of hours of very hard rowing, she managed finally to pull past the old city. By the time they reached the palace of the last Sultan of Turkey, the worst was behind them. Ahead was the long but much easier crossing of the Black Sea, onward to the Soviet home of the Golden Fleece. There's no word yet on how Tim plans to explain the murder, double-cross, and intrigue Jason used to steal the treasure once he got there. But since people really haven't changed that much in 3,000 years, that human melodrama is probably the easiest part of the legend to believe.
It probably is.
Right.
What was the Golden Fleece that he was after?
Good question. Russian archaeologists, though, think they have an answer.
Well, didn't it symbolize something, or was it
No,
real?
they think it was a literal golden fleece. You've seen the old prospectors from the gold rush days panning for gold in gold-bearing streams. Well, the Russian archaeologists have found that in ancient days, their gold miners used to take a fleece, literally a fleece from a sheep or lamb, and stretch it out in a gold-bearing stream. And then as the water came down, bearing the gold, there was something in the lanolin in the sheep or lamb's hair that made the gold particles adhere. So this, they say, was a particularly rich example of a golden fleece.
So it really was
A real golden
sheepskin
fleece.
with gold in it.
That's it.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Geraldo.